Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to discuss the Hitchcock and Truffaut book from, I think it was from 1966, the first release of this book Truffaut made. And this book is a conversation essentially between Truffaut and Hitchcock. Truffaut, like many other directors, really admired Alfred Hitchcock, but he didn't think that Hitchcock had got enough recognition back in the days, because back in the days when Hitchcock made his Hollywood movies, they were very popular, but many film critics didn't take Hitchcock particularly seriously. They thought his movies was more entertainment, but they didn't have enough substance. But Truffaut and many other French critics and filmmakers really thought that Hitchcock was a combination between the entertainment of movie making and also art cinema, and that Hitchcock has much more substance in his movies than many film critics at that time thought. So I think it was in the early 60s, I don't know if it was 61 or 62, Truffaut started making these interviews with Hitchcock and discussed all the movies he has made, and from his early years to his later in his later career, and also his early life and his inspiration as a young film director at that time. And it is an incredible, fascinating book in my opinion, and there is so much material that you can always find something new in the book that you didn't thought of that much about the first time you read it. And I think I got this book like 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never really read it from the beginning to the end, because at the time I got the book I hadn't read or seen all of Hitchcock movies. Even to this day I haven't, but there were some movies I was particularly interested in to watch that I didn't want to read about. So I only read about his early careers and the movies I knew about. And then afterwards, when I have watched some of Hitchcock's movies that I hadn't seen, then I started to read about those chapters in this book. And what I really like also about the book is that even though Truffaut is a great admirer of Hitchcock and think he should have the recognition that he deserved, but he also talked like a film critic in that way, that he also challenged Hitchcock to be honest and to come with his own opinions about what works in his movies and what doesn't work. And there I must also say, you don't see that nowadays, when you see about filmmakers discussing their movies. Yeah, sometimes you can hear about maybe like, was it Steven Spielberg who says something like he only thinks 3 of his movies are perfect or something like that, but he doesn't explain why he thinks these movies work particularly great and why some of the other ones doesn't work in his opinion. And that is what I incredibly admire about Hitchcock, is that he's brutally honest, both about actors, about people he works with, and also about himself, what he thinks works in his movies and what doesn't. And he also takes you into his in the progress of what it was that he thought was interesting about making the movies that he did. But in some ways, in that way, you can also almost say that Hitchcock himself is kind of a film critic in that way, because he discussed them in such details. Of course, he has his personal experience making them, but he also knows in how he thinks the movie could have been even better if he had done what he essentially wanted. And there, I think, particularly, I think it's interesting to hear his opinion about Suspicion, particularly about the ending, which I'm not a big fan of the Suspicion ending, but he wanted the movie to have a bit more of an open ending, and I really like to sort of hear that the ending in the movie wasn't what he essentially wanted. He wanted it to be a bit more open, and if you have watched Suspicion, you know that it's very much a Hollywood ending with a kind of a happy ending. But it's good to know that he acknowledged that as well, that the ending didn't work. But what you also, in my opinion, discover when you're reading the book, even over time, is that you start actually disagreeing with Hitchcock himself and Truffaut during the book. Yeah, sure, they have that their opinions matters, but you also realize, all right, this is a book made in the 60s. You know, it's 60 years ago now. Time have changes, so I'm really thinking about some of their opinions. If they were made later on, I think maybe they will be a bit more harsh on this part and a bit more positive about this other part. And for example, there's a movie from the 30s that Hitchcock made, which was Sabotage. I think it's from 36 or 37. In my opinion, that is Hitchcock's greatest work in Britain in the 30s, I think. I know I'm one of the few people who thinks that, but Hitchcock and Truffaut didn't care that much for that book, that movie. And I really disagree about their opinions. Sure, it's interesting to hear why they think that, but I think if they had seen it now or something, I think they would have been a bit more positive about it. Because Hitchcock really didn't like, now I'm going to spoil a part of Sabotage, if you haven't seen that movie. But Hitchcock didn't like the idea of the boy who dies, in the bomb scene in the movie. He thought that was a mistake because it sort of doesn't, it changes the way that he views what suspense is. He wanted that people should have a relief that, the bomb didn't blow up, but here it actually does. And I'm completely the opposite. I think it's a brilliant decision that he did. But if I have to understand his opinions, I think back in the days, maybe that was a mistake to do in the 30s, where the world were going to change, not only in movies but also in world history. It was right before the Second World War, and maybe it was too grim for that part of the world, what Hitchcock viewed the world at that time. And but I think that moment is brilliant, and I think Sabotage, I'm not saying it's a masterpiece, but I don't think any of his earlier works is a masterpiece in my opinion, but Sabotage is, in my opinion, Hitchcock's most mature work from the 30s, in my opinion, and I think it's the one who resonates most with me. But that's just interesting because Truffaut and Hitchcock didn't care that much for it. Another thing, there was also two other movies I thought should be mentioned. Hitchcock thought Rope was a mistake in the way that he didn't edit the movie because he felt that was not what he views cinema essentially. And you can say, yeah, it's not about movies, it's about cutting a movie in pieces, so you have a frame and then you edit it together and then you make a movie with that way. And in Rope there's almost no editing, so he wanted the experiments to be one continuous shot, and he thought afterwards that was a mistake. And here I can say, yeah, I understand his opinions, but I think there is incredible amount of tension when he doesn't edit the movie, because there's some stakes in the situation, and I think he builds so much suspense around the idea that Farley Granger and the other one, I can't remember the other actor's name, but they are inviting friends over to their house to when they just have murdered one in the exact place. And I think that the one continuous shot makes it actually a bit more thrilling in that way, because it's almost like you can feel the actors, they are a bit nervous to make a mistake, and that in some ways it relates to the part of the movie, if that makes sense. So I don't think it was a mistake, and I think Rope is a great movie. Another movie I also want to discuss that they discuss is Stage Fright from is it 1950, I think. I don't think Stage Fright is a masterpiece. I think it's a decent movie, but Hitchcock felt that the flashback sequence in the beginning, where the antagonist tells a false story, and then there are a flashback to see his view. He is, the antagonist is murdering someone, and he is telling a false story, and then there's this flashback in the beginning of the movie. Hitchcock felt that was mistakes, because he felt it was a cheating in that way, because the audience didn't connect with a false flashback. But then I can say, if you look at many crime movies or series afterwards, you see that all the time, a false flashback. So I think, again, it's for the time being, maybe that was a mistake, but if you're looking over time, then it's incredible modern that you are dealing with a false flashback, and Hitchcock was ahead of his time doing that. So I don't think it was a mistake, but I think it's something that Hitchcock would have acknowledged if he could have lived 200 years old. He would probably have thought, okay, I've actually made a great decision back then. But again, I don't think it's Stage Fright's weakness. I think the weakness in Stage Fright is that there's too much going on in the middle part, and there's too many characters, essentially. So the movie's kind of a mess in the middle half. But I think it's a decent movie, actually. And it has nothing to do with the false flashback, that I feel that the movie is have some weaknesses. So yeah, it's interesting to sort of hear the conversations, and I can also disagree with some of Truffaut's opinions during the movie, the book, but I really acknowledge that he does his best to really asking constructive questions to Hitchcock. So he doesn't want to criticize the movies too much, because then I feel like there's a part in the book that I thought is a bit funny. I think it's in the Wrong Man, about the movie The Wrong Man from the 50s, and that's actually where Truffaut is a bit harsh on Hitchcock's directing style, and it's almost like Hitchcock becomes a bit offended, and there's some fun segments there. I think it's a bit funny, the dialogue between them, the conversations. And here, and maybe Truffaut felt a bit ashamed of that, and I didn't want to ask too much critical questions to Hitchcock. But there they have a fundamental disagreement about Hitchcock's directing style, where Truffaut thinks he's a bit too artsy in that, or too good for the movie in some ways. So yeah, and there's also one segment I thought another segment I disagree a bit about with Truffaut's opinion is that he didn't feel that Gregory Peck was the right choice for Spellbound and was the Paradine case. And here I disagree, because I actually think Gregory Peck works incredibly well with Hitchcock. I'm not the biggest fan of Spellbound, but I think the Paradine case is actually quite underrated, and I think Gregory Peck works incredibly well for that movie. So there I disagree with Truffaut. But this is not my necessarily saying that but it's a good way for me or other people who read the book to have an opinion about what they say, because I think the movie's about criticism, about acknowledgement of a great director, the pros and cons, but I also think you have to decide, if you have watched the movies, what you feel about the movie essentially. The movies essentially. I think the book is incredible. The only nitpick I can say is that there's some few parts that I feel could have been explored a bit more about some of Hitchcock's movies, particularly Dial M for Murder. I feel they go over that movie too quickly. Dial M for Murder is not a great movie in my opinion, but I do think it is a decent and well-made movie. And I think Truffaut is actually quite keen on it, but Hitchcock didn't care that much for it. And I feel like if Truffaut really liked it, then I think he had to push a bit more Hitchcock to discuss what it is that he even doesn't like about it, or what is really works, because you can almost feel like it's Hitchcock's way of saying, I don't want to discuss it. It was made for the studio. He only did it for the studio essentially, and it was just a play he had to film, and that is really the only thing they discuss about it. But I think you can find a bit more, because Hitchcock have done plays before, where they have discussed the movies a bit more in general, and here I think they go over Dial M for Murder too quickly. There's some really good parts in Dial M for Murder, especially the first 45 minutes. I think is actually really good, and Ray Milland in that movie is a great villain. One of Hitchcock's best villains, but unfortunately the movie, in my opinion, falls apart in the last hour. I don't know. I can't remember how long the movie is, but I think the last half is a bit boring. But the first half works incredibly well, and Ray Milland is a great villain. And my opinion is just that I think because Truffaut actually likes it, he should have pushed Hitchcock to explain a bit more his feelings about the process of making the movie and what he didn't think essentially worked. So, yeah. But overall, I think it's just a great book about film, the process of making a film, essentially. And here there are so many films to discuss, from silent movies to his later work in the 70s. The time have changed. It's over 50 years essentially that Hitchcock made movies, and so it's very fascinating to hear what the Hitchcock, who was a director in the silent era, to the old man in the 70s who just wanted to get a new project going. He had incredible success with Frenchie, after two not really good success with Tom Curtin and Topaz, and then Frenchie came, great success, and Hitchcock only wanted to get one movie going, and that was Family Plot, which I like actually, but it wasn't a success, and Hitchcock felt bad about it, and he wanted to make a new movie that he unfortunately never got to make, and it's really it ends quite sad, the book, really, and but it also sort of, it's interesting to see that Hitchcock was just a human being. Maybe he was a great artist, but he was a person who wanted success, even though he had much success, but he just wanted to keep going, and in the end he couldn't anymore. He was too old, and he was not feeling very well, and he had going through struggles in his life, and so yeah, he died. I think was 80 or 81 years old, and Truffaut unfortunately also died, I think 4 years later, and that was also sad, because Truffaut could have been much older and making much more movies, and but so that way the book is bittersweet, because when the book ends, it's really about the last phase of both Hitchcock and Truffaut's careers, and I think Truffaut should have a huge amount of what is the right word? He should be acknowledged for this book, because I think it's his greatest contribution to cinema, Yeah, Truffaut was a good filmmaker, don't get me wrong. He has made some good movies, especially The 400 Blows. I think it's a really, really good movie. But I don't think any of his movies is as important as this book. Because I don't think if Truffaut didn't make this book, I don't think Hitchcock would have been as recognized today. Maybe it would only be Psycho or Rear Window that would be talked about. But I think Truffaut managed to get a new light on Hitchcock. He was almost discovered from a new perspective, and that is the beauty of this book. So yeah, great book. I would highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And so yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comments if what you think of this book, if you have read it, or and what is your opinions of it. I hope you will all have a very nice day. Bye.